All right, hey everybody, Dan Shinder here on Drum Talk TV. Excited to have a first-time offender, first-time hazing victim, first-time guest, Harvey Lee, author, and so much more. How are you, Harvey? Coming to us from London, right?
Yeah, I'm in London. I think you had it right the first time down, first time offender, but rock and roll offender. But yeah, no, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me on. It's great to connect with you over here.
Thank you so much. And folks, if you're not familiar, Harvey Lee is not, like I said, so much more, but we're going to start with the fact that he's the author of Backstage Pass, 50% rock and roll, 50% business, 100% true. And I sincerely mean this. This book is for anybody in music, anybody in business, anybody that works for a company of any kind, or any music fan. I think I covered pretty much everybody. It's not really industry specific, Harvey, and it's not really age demographic
Yeah,
specific. It's so there's so much appeal here. We're going to dig into a lot of stuff, but
great.
Harvey, aka Shekel, Shek S, and they should have thrown in schlep for
Yeah,
schlepper, because you started as a schlepper, then a roadie, then some
I
front of
did.
house work and the studio work,
Yeah,
music management. Let's
yeah,
start with that part of your story and your world, hooking up with Herman's Hermits,
yeah.
a
Wow, I
band.
did. Yeah, I did start off as a schlepper. You're absolutely right, I suppose. So I started my professional career as a roadie
Right.
in the 80s. And so I think to give a sort of time and a place is helpful. So in the mid 80s, I was at music college after crash. I didn't leave school. I crashed out of school. I crashed out of school and did a couple of bummed around for a couple of years doing some odd jobs, which I talk about in the book in great
Yeah.
detail.
Yeah.
And ended up at music college. And while I was at music college, really after discovering what I really wanted to do, which was follow my dream of being in music, um, I was at band practice playing in a big hair heavy metal band. It's like 1986, 87. So everyone's got the big hairdos. I mean, any hair right now would be quite welcome.
I know, even I had big hair.
Yeah, yeah, we all had big hair,
I had a
and
lot
it
of
was all
hair.
the curls were all natural. And the lead singer said to me, he says, "Oh, I'm." He worked for a sound company, a touring sound company. He said, "I need some help at the weekend. Would you like to come? It's £5. It's about $7. $7 and a bag of chips or French
Right.
fries." I'm translating British to American here,
Yeah.
and I went for a fiver and a bag of chips. Yeah, sure, why not? What is it? He goes, we're going to go to Margate Winter Gardens overnight, and we're going to do a show, and we're going to come straight back. So where we were living in the UK at the time, which was Manchester, actually was where I grew up, that's a 550-mile round trip in one night, right?
Wow.
So you leave in the afternoon in the back of the American equivalent would be a Dodge van, right?
Right.
In England, it's a transit van, but it's a Dodge van. We do the show, we get there, and the band is Herman's Hermits. It's their 1960s band. This is the 80s, so it's 20 years after their heyday, and they're playing like a tea dance kind of
Yeah.
thing. We call the audience the Blue Rinse Brigade. I don't know if that translates, but little old ladies with the blue tinted
Yeah.
hair, those kind of things.
Yeah.
And we got there, and my job really was just to schlep flight cases and to help lift stuff and put things in place and tear it down and drive back. And that's where I met the band. The whole story of how that came about and how it went is in the book.
Yeah.
And that was really my first major step, for $7, my first $7 step on the professional ladder of music. I went back to music college the following Monday, but then I became a weekend warrior, and then a school holidays warrior. So in the half term, the end of term semester, at the end of the semester, we disappear to Europe. And then as I lay it out in the book, that took me to my first tour of America in 1988 with Herman's Hermits, and I didn't come back for 3 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Big,
So,
big
and
change.
that's where I experienced all the things that you mentioned, Dan, earlier on, doing merch, doing front of house, doing monitoring, doing production, working with promoters. Literally got thrown in at the deep end on a kind of grassroots tour as we're driving around America, and it's how you learn, isn't it?
Yeah, and the interesting thing about all of those different things you did, one of the things not sure even why it fascinated me so much was what you just said, the whole merch side of things. And
Yeah.
when you were tucked away in the dark,
Yeah.
in a closet, under the stairs beneath a bridge, and you weren't having customers come to you, you went out like the cigarettes lady in the 40s at the baseball
Yeah, yeah,
games,
that was me.
or the popcorn guy,
Yeah,
you went out to the crowd.
yeah.
Yeah.
That was me. You know what? When I was writing the story, when I was writing the stories about T-shirt sales and merch in the book,
Right,
when
and
I
how
wrote,
much it is to the revenue stream of
yeah, yeah,
touring and
I
everything.
never thought people would pick up on the merch stories in the
Yeah.
book as much as they have. I
Oh,
mean,
it's great.
I haven't done. I mean, I do a few interviews a week at the moment because the book's just come out, and every single interview, almost without fail, mentions the merch stories, and I'm flabbergasted. So just to put some context to it, yeah. So I'm in Germany on my first European tour with Herman's Hermits, and selling T-shirts, and it hasn't really changed. Only the scale has changed between then and today.
Right.
Is that on top of the fee that a band gets paid, they have to find other ways of making money, other revenue streams, right? And merch is one of the major ones, because you either own your rights or you have a pretty big royalty. And the more T-shirts you sell, the more you eat that night. It's literally singing for your supper. And I remember this one show. The show that in question that you're talking about is in a place called Gelsenkirchen in Germany. Very specific. So again, the story's in the book. And we're playing with a 70s band who were like probably royalty in the UK in the 1970s, called The Sweet.
Right.
So The Sweet, David Bowie, T-Rex, they were all household names in the 1970s. And we're playing with them. Like you said, it was in an ice hockey rink, 5,000 people in there. It was pre-European Union, so it was all Deutschmarks and carnets and customs forms. It was how we used to have to do it in the 80s. And we weren't selling anything. The room was dark. The promoter obviously didn't care about his concession percentage. And all the bands were complaining that they weren't selling anything, including the band I was working for. So I just took it upon myself to make it happen. Right. And like you said, like the cigarette lady in the 40s, I don't know if the analogy works, but the ice cream salesperson in the cinema, in the
Yeah.
movies, right? They come out at halftime or just
Yep.
before the main event, ice creams and bags of nuts and I don't know, whatever
Right.
else they sell on these things.
Exactly.
And I just did the same thing. I just ladled up T-shirts over my house and I went into the stalls. And don't forget, this is Germany. Nobody speaks English. Well,
Right.
that's not true now, but
Right. Back
35
then.
years ago, and the
Yeah.
euro didn't exist, so it's all Deutschmarks, local currency. And I just walking through the stores going, T-shirts, Herman's T-shirts, €10, $10. And long story short, I sold the lot. I threw like 3 boxes. I think the expectation was maybe we'd sell 20 T-shirts. I sold 3 boxes, and that's where I earned my nickname that night, the
Yeah.
Shekel, because the lead guitarist of the band, Derek Leckenby, he says he couldn't believe what we were in the Shekels, and he started doing his merry jig, and from that moment on, I was known as the Shekel. So the man who could make things happen on tour with bands, and the man who could sell all your T-shirts. And I don't think I've really recovered from it. I got the name retired after about 20 years because I got sick of people forgetting what my real name was.
Well,
But,
and now you've put it out there in the book, so you're in for another run, right?
I'm going another. I'm getting text messages now. People calling me Shekel, and I was like, "You have no right to call me Shekel. You weren't there." But like you say, if it's in the book, it's in the public domain, so people can say what they like.
Great stories. I'd love for you to share a funny story if you could think of one off the top of your head. Doesn't even have to be in the book; it could be outside the book. Either way, a funny story that you may have had an experience with Barry Whitman over the years.
A funny story with Barry Whitman. Oh, yeah. So Barry Whitman is the original drummer. Is it apps that were on Drum Talk TV? He's the original drummer of Herman's Hermits. He's been there. He's been in that band since day one. He's still in the band.
Yeah.
It's been going 60 odd years and he's still the original drummer.
Yeah.
And he's the least serious person I still know to this day, right?
Sounds like a great leader to me.
Well, he's a proper drummer, right? I mean, I don't think I've ever met a single drummer that was serious, and I love drummers for that, right? They're a special breed. In the same way that bass players are a special breed and lead guitarists are a special breed, and lead singers as well. And we're in Dallas, and this is a story in the book. And we're in Dallas, and we did the show, and the show came and went without incident. It was all fine. Sold a bunch of T-shirts. Everything was routine, right? And by this stage, we'd got the modus operandi of selling T-shirts really fine-tuned. It was like, really to the point, really pointy. So we knew what we'd sell, we knew how they'd sell, and so on and so forth. So we packed away and we go outside the venue after the show. It's actually still daylight, so it was in the middle of summer. And I get this tap on the shoulder from this, what must have been an 8-foot Darth Vader-like Texan cop. He's all dressed in, well, all I remember was he's dressed in black, and I just looked, and I'm 6'1", right? So I'm not small, right?
Yeah.
Well, I might have shrunk an inch in the past 20 years, but I'm about 6 foot. All I remember is with my long hair looking up like this. And you are the biggest thing I've ever seen. It was like standing at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty. It's like, I'm crooking my neck, and he's looking down at me going, and I'm sorry, I can't do the accent, right? He goes, do you have a permit?
Right.
And I'm like, no. And I knew full well I didn't have a permit, but I didn't realize we needed one either.
Yeah.
And I look at the band, and they're kind of distancing themselves away from me.
Oh, really?
And then the next thing I know,
pushing you forward.
I get swerved around, pushed on the cop car, this big black
God,
Texan cop car, handcuffed around the back, head under the door, and into the back seat, door closed. And I'm sitting there, and I'm there for a few seconds going, oh my gosh, my life is over. My mum's going to kill me, because I'm only 19 at this point. My mum's going to kill me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my life's finished. And I'm like, what is this? I've never been arrested before. And the band were nowhere to be seen. They just left me for dead. And the cop this police officer gets in there, starts the engine up, and at this point I'm really starting to feel anxious, and I'm not easily flustered, I have to tell you that. And at this point I start getting really flustered, and I'm like, oh my god, this is real. And his car starts pulling away,
and just in another country.
Yeah, and I'm just like, and he's on the radio, and he's like, oh, I'm bringing in whatever, illegal alien, and it's like, oh shit, this is me. And I catch a glimpse in the rear view mirror from the back of the car of the band. And all I can see is Barry Whitwam's shoulders going up and down like this with his back to me. And I'm thinking, I can't swear live on the internet, can I? And
you can.
You can. I'm like, you. And he turns around and he's crying, laughing. And at that point, I knew the game was up. And it turned out, and the full story is in the book, it turned out to be a complete stitch up. Right, this 7 or 8 foot cop happened to be a friend of the band's, and he was doing it for fun, right? And this is a daily occurrence.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
But Bean's his nickname. Bean was a practical joker. He's the least serious person I know. He's got to be he's got to be at least early 70s, mid 70s now, and he's still going. Amazing.
I think he's 78 this year. I think he turned 78 this year. Yeah. I don't remember the month, but 46. Yeah.
He looks good. And the funny thing is, he was the youngest one in the band.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So he was like the Ringo, right? So he was like, I don't know, 17 when they hit it big.
Oh, wow.
Something like that.
Ringo and George were way young. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, can you imagine being 17 or 18 and it's 1964 and all of a sudden your life just blows up?
Yeah.
And in 1960, it was either 65 or 66. I do say it in the book. Herman's Hermits were the biggest band on the planet. And in America, they were bigger than the Beatles at the height of the Beatles, right? Yeah. That's how big Herman's Hermits were. Yeah. Just to put some context with it. So everybody listening might think, oh, who's that little old unknown band from the 60s? I'm like, no, they mattered. In 65, 66, they mattered. In 66, they were on a huge stadium tour in the States, and their support band, as I call it out in the book, their support band was The Who.
Who you may have heard of, folks.
Who you might have heard of, who is still going.
Yeah, as well.
It's amazing how these bands are still going. And I absolutely love the fact that they are, because life would be far less colorful without them.
I agree. I know it sounds so much like a platitude and watered down in a cliche, but there will never be that music again. There will never be another Herman's Hermits, Beatles, The Who, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Yes, Genesis, ELP. That music will just never freaking happen. It doesn't mean there won't be good music.
Yeah,
but
that era's gone.
Hang on to that. And
AC, funnily enough, because AC/DC are a recurring theme all the way through the book.
Yes,
and there's a certain irony to last week, right? So the book came out on Valentine's Day, 14th of February. So it's still very fresh. And on the 12th of February, so 2 days before the book comes out, AC/DC announced their 50th anniversary tour and all the dates in Europe. And so, number one, what a coincidence. But how's this for the number two coincidence? The first date on their European tour is in Gelsenkirchen in Germany, where I sold all those Herman's t-shirts
Yeah.
I just talked about.
Wow,
And I'm
that's
like, and I'm
crazy.
looking at the tour itinerary, and I've got tickets to go to the 2 London shows. And it's like, I'm looking at the tour itinerary. First of all, I can't believe they announced the tour the week my book's out. And second of all, I can't believe they're starting the tour in Gelsenkirchen, because if anybody puts the two together, they'll have a
Yeah.
good laugh to themselves, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, that is something.
Yeah, it's one of those things that life just throws at you. You couldn't make it up.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
so I want to ask you, Harvey, what was the biggest thing you learned from the music industry experience when you then went over to working with Virgin Xbox? And let's
Yeah.
talk about that pivot and what you brought with you, and we'll go from there, because I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of gold there.
Yeah. So what was really interesting, so I made this, I've been working in music for the best part of 20 years before I made that pivot. And then I did another 20 years in the video games industry. The interesting thing was how similar it was, right? So, I mean, there's two aspects to this. There's obvious key differences, but on the differences that you see are on the outside. You could observe it from the outside, but from the inside, the differences are pretty fundamental. The first one is the type of businesses that they are. So most creative industries have more in common than that differs themselves from each other. And what I mean by that is most creative industries have an artist, they have a publishing distribution model, and they have a royalty publishing based model as the business model. Now, there's some subtleties and differences between more, but if I look at the music industry, which I've worked in, the video games industry, which I've worked in, and now the book publishing industry, which I'm now in as an author and a publisher as well, right?
Right.
The similarities between the three are absolutely uncanny, right? They are, each of them have an artist. So with books, it's the authors. With music, it's the musicians. And with video games, it's the computer coders. They're the artists, right?
Mm-hmm.
They all work on they all publish creative media. So with authors, they publish books through the written word. With music, it used to be CDs and vinyl, and now it's the internet. Through music, creative music, and obviously with video games, it's computer code onto optical media as well. And then the business part of it is very similar as well. You have, generally speaking, enormous companies controlling 5 companies controlling 80% of the market.
Yeah.
On a published based business, and that is a transfer of intellectual property and copyright.
Right.
It's all the same, right?
Yeah.
The difference is one's words, one's music, and one's code. But apart from that, it's all the same. So what that has allowed me to do, and in the early days I didn't really appreciate it, but it became pretty clear, pretty quickly, was that if you've got transferable skills in one of them, if you apply yourself correctly, you could move to another one. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of HR people have asked me over the years, they say, Harvey, how and why did you move from music to video games to cybersecurity to print to communities and then consulting and being, I was like, how? It's like to HR people, because HR people and hiring managers generally work on this notion called the law of attraction. I don't know if you've seen the film The Secret. Yeah. My wife makes me watch it every holiday. They're just like, you are going to watch that film. Right? It's like, and it's my pleasure to watch it, but the law of attraction basically means that like attracts like.
Yeah.
And what that means in the business world is that everybody just stays in their lane. Everything's vertical. It's like, if I'm trying to hire someone in a B2B orientated business, I'm going to look for someone in a B2B background. If I work in fintech, I'm going to look for someone in fintech. Everything's vertical, but the world doesn't work that way. Right. The world's just a big messy place.
Especially now.
Yeah, it's even more so now, more so since lockdown. So, in the past 3-4 years, we've probably had 30 years of progress all squeezed into this little space, right?
Yeah.
And we're all trying to catch up. And my answer to these people is always the same. It's like, it's not the category, it's the possibilities that are made possible by my capability, by my skills. And the
Mhm.
skills that I have as a marketer, and specifically as a product marketer, are hugely transferable, especially in the creative industries, but they're also transferable into other industries as well. And that's why I've always stayed in the marketing side that I already have, but moved across categories. A lot of people, I'd probably say most people, have done it the opposite way around, which
Yes.
is they've stayed in the same category for their whole career and changed function. I've stayed in the same function and changed category, but that's just me. I tend to do things a bit different.
Yeah. No,
For
all
one
of
reason
that
or another.
makes so much sense. And, you know, I mean this sincerely, folks. It breaks my heart when musicians refuse to learn anything about the business side, or
Yeah,
they think they know it because they're copying what everyone else is doing who
yeah,
doesn't know what they're doing, or
yeah,
they have someone doing it for them who they didn't know enough to vet, so they
yeah,
have no idea if there's even anything to learn from that person, or
yeah,
they just think they're entitled, they're doing it, I don't need to learn it. That's such the biggest mistake. In fact,
yeah,
I come from the music industry, folks, so if I'm banging on my tribe,
yeah,
not that tribe, the music tribe,
yeah, yeah.
all these wonderful decorations of me playing over the years and my favorite artists, they're covering up holes in the wall from me banging my head against it, trying to work with people in the music industry on a business level sometimes. Not everybody, but
Yeah,
there
yeah.
has been
It's
that
hard
where a
work.
lot of, especially the more artistic people are. I know my wife's a professional artist, I'm in the arts. The less um other side brain we wake up and we
Yeah, yeah,
use or want to use, and even that is transferable. Move your creative skills
mm,
into the business side of what you do,
yeah,
folks. I mean, that's what
yeah.
marketing's all about, but so many artists just don't want to learn this.
And one of the things that I go into in the book is how I discovered my unique value, right? And it was in the most bizarre, not bizarre way, but in the most unusual way, kind of happenstance way. When I decided when I was 17, I'm gonna music's my life. I just got to make it happen one way or the other. I had no clue how to make it happen. I had all the desire and no talent, right? And I just thought I went going to go to music college, so I thought I'd start to learn there. And what I learned was I wasn't any good. It's like I had a bass guitar. I picked the bass guitar because it had two strings less than a full guitar, so I just thought, well, it's just less of a challenge. But and to be honest, if I could have been bothered, I could have mastered it. I believe that anyone can master anything if they really apply themselves.
Yes,
But what
absolutely.
actually it didn't light me up, and what actually lit me up at the beginning was the technical aspect of it. So the sound recording. So I studied to be a sound engineer in the studio and then on the road. So I found that interesting, and then I got bored with that. And then what I found that I was actually good at was making things happen. So when I hit the road, um, I found not just the t-shirt sales, but dealing with promoters, whipping the local crews into good shape, and things like this, and just getting things to happen. And the bands that I worked with, or the bands who I was working alongside, who observed me, um, all said the same thing. They were like, I cannot believe how much work you get done for the band, so they can just focus on what they're here to do, right? I just took
Fathom
it
the
all.
thought, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a story in the book. Um, there's a story in the book about where we're in our Iowa. Iowa? Where's Des Moines?
Iowa,
Iowa,
yeah,
Iowa.
it's
So we're
that.
in Iowa. Sorry, I'm British. My geography is not bad,
No,
but
that's okay.
my American geography gets a little
There's
bit funny.
Americans that don't know where the heck Des Moines is or how
All
to
right,
pronounce
so
it, or
we're in
don't
we're
worry.
in Des Moines, and there's three places in Iowa we're at, but we're off the beaten track a little bit, right? So we're not in Chicago. We're not in Chicago, um, and the promoter goes bankrupt, right? And we're in this enormous auditorium. It's like 10,000 seater auditorium, and we get there, and we're on with the Birds. I don't remember the Birds. So
Mhm.
so the Birds
Oh,
are
yeah.
headlining it, and Hermits were special guests, and there's a couple of other bands as well. And we get there, and there's a huge sort of commotion and kerfuffle in the hotel lobby that we're all in, and all the bands and the crew are there. And I'm like, this is a bit unusual, because we're supposed to be at sound check. And a long story short, the promoter had gone bankrupt, and I think they sold like 200 tickets in a 10,000 seater arena. I mean, something was wildly off, right?
Yeah.
But the promoter had done a runner, right? And there was no one to pay the bills. The venue was like, who's going to pay us? They were like, what are we going to do? And, as working bands, you need to pick up money, most nights to keep your show on the road. And we had 3
Yeah.
shows with this promoter in the same week. We had no other bookings that week, but
Mm.
then they were all big shows. So those shows would have kept us going for a couple of weeks, and including paying the salaries, right? So it was a big problem for us, a big problem for all the bands. And long story short, we had to have a decision. We need to make a decision. Are we going to do the show or are we going to skip town? Right? If we skip town, not only do the tickets that got sold get voided, but a whole bunch of people lose a load of money. But the bands decided, and again, I'll lay it out, but the bands decided to carry on with the show, right? So, but we stripped the crew back, and literally I had to make the entire thing happen for all the bands as the production manager on the side of the stage. So I did the Birds, I did Hermits Hermits, I did Bowser from Sha-Na-Na, if people remember Sha-Na-Na. He was great, actually. I really liked Bowser, John Bowman. And a couple others as well. So I don't know if you ever played in a 10,000 seat arena to 200 people. It's a pretty empty experience. There's a lot of echo, and it's just like it's like boom, because there's no one there to absorb it. And I'm like, this is pathetic. But we did the show, and it was somewhat surreal. And all the bands afterwards were just like, "We need you," and so I discovered my value of just making things happen, and often, as as some of the stories in the book lay out, against the odds, right?
Yeah.
Or when I didn't even have to, I did it anyway. And I really forged a reputation for that point of view. So I discovered that value, and that really sort of, even to this day, to be honest with you, Dan, is even with writing the book, the ability to make things happen against the odds. I mean, writing your book is a difficult thing. It's a hard thing, right?
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing for any author, especially a first-time one. But again, I made it happen.
And especially an autobiography and opening your heart and your vulnerability and just everything to the world. I mean, that's the big thing.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. You tell me, right? It's not for me to say, but I mean, the book is. I basically say the book is far from conventional because it's part business book, part memoir, and the memoir part is not really me telling you what happened to my life and why I'm so great. The memoir is a gritty story of determination, a coming of age tale, from age 12 all the way to it finishes about 10 years ago. The story, and at the end of every chapter, there's the business learning. So when I worked with my editor on this, I'm just like, how are we going to tell the story? Because I knew that just writing a memoir wasn't going to be interesting enough. The reason the book came about in the first place is that I used to tell all these funny rock and roll war stories at the water cooler and the coffee station at all these corporate companies that I worked for the past 10, 20 years. And people would say, they'd all have the same reaction, Dan. They'd all say, you did what? You helped AC/DC? You went where? All of it. And it was always the same kind of reaction. And then people started saying, you know what, you should really write these down, because they seem to be endless. There's endless amounts of stories. And at some point, I can't remember the exact day. I just decided to write them down. But when I was doing the research in full swing, I quickly learned that actually, 50% of people aren't going to buy a memoir from someone they've never heard. Similarly, the opposite is true. If I wrote this as a marketing book or a business only book, why would anybody care? You only have to go to Amazon and search and just do a search, go marketing book, and then you get 6,000 results, and you just think there's no point. Who am I to write a marketing book? Scott Galloway's written 6. It's like there's no point. So what can I do that's unique? Well, first of all, the story is unique. How can I frame the story that people get more out of it than just a few laughs, right? And so I ended up on this kind of hybrid format of part memoir, part business book, where people can hopefully feel inspired and motivated by reading the story, by being in the story, and then get some hard business learnings as well that you can apply to your life as well, regardless of how old you are. I mean, I think you mentioned it to me offline. It's like this book has a pretty broad appeal, broader than I expected, actually, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, and like I said in the opening, there's so much there to enjoy no matter what age someone is or what business they're in or what kind of music they like. Even if you get it for the non-business part because of the
Yeah,
memoir aspect,
yeah,
there's just so many great stories and motivating, inspiring experiences there. When you realized, your value, talk about how you applied that the most working with Xbox and without, reading the whole part of the book,
yeah.
whatever part you want to touch on regarding what was the biggest like pivot with that product was something that, a challenge that had to be addressed that you got past.
I think that one of the things that I've learned about myself, in fact, when I was doing the media interviews for the book a couple of weeks back, somebody at the BBC actually said to me, she'd read it, and she said to me, she says, what I realize about you, Harvey Lee, is that you don't, you're not lucky, you create your own luck. And it's not about you being in a time and a place. You create the time and you create the place. So you create your luck. And then when you find your chance, right, when the chance comes, you throw yourself at it.
Oh,
And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. As you see with the stories in the book, you have these searing highs and these rather a lot of crushing lows as well, right?
yeah.
But these highs and lows, and that's part of life. But the two big pivots for me, certainly going from music to video games, or certainly from Virgin to Xbox specifically, was Xbox was a special time for Microsoft, but
Yeah.
also for me, because I was one of the few people to join the Xbox team before it launched, right? So in
Yeah. That's
Europe,
amazing. Think of what it became. Give
yeah,
like time context for the younger folk that might not know what the
yeah,
heck we're even talking about.
2001. So
Okay.
in the US, the first Xbox launched in November. I think it was the 15th of November 2001 in New York.
Wow, it
In
was that
Europe,
long ago?
it launched in New York 8 weeks after the Twin Towers came down.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
So there's a story. I don't go into detail in the book, but basically, Robbie Bach, who was the chief Xbox officer, who we all worked for at the time, fantastic executive, still is. Um, he was in New York on 9/11, uh,
Mm.
because the original press tour for Xbox was on 9/11 in New York, and not a lot of people know that. And when things the tragic events happened, obviously the tour was cancelled, but he tells his own story in his own book, actually, about how he had to get the hell out of Dodge and find his way, and they couldn't get any flights, obviously, and that they found a rental car, and they had drove 40 hours in a rental car back to Seattle,
40
right?
hours. Wow.
40 hours. And these are executives at Microsoft. So it doesn't matter who you are.
Yeah.
When the proverbial hits the fan, it hits the fan and everybody's affected.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so it came out 2 months later, which in itself is a miracle anyway, considering the events. And in Europe, it came out mid-March. I think it was the 14th of March, 2002. So that was me. And I joined at the beginning of January. So literally 10 weeks before
Yeah.
came out, I joined the team. I was one of the last. I was the only product marketer to join the team, and I was employee number 12. And
God.
and it was like, here's your desk. This thing's coming out in 10 weeks. Good luck. And I was like, I felt like the cannonball. I was complete cannon fodder. It was like, all right, sink or swim. But it was the same for all of us. All of us on that original
All in
team.
the same
Yeah,
position
we're
now.
on the same
Yeah.
boat. It's like, you know what, all hands to the deck. We didn't have pros. When I left Virgin, people were saying, "Oh, you're really trading up. You're going from, you know, mid-level station wagon to a Rolls Royce, right?" And I was like, "Okay, what? I didn't know any different. You're not going to suffer this, and this problem you had here over there. Guess what?
Right.
It was worse."
It was the same, right?
Yeah, well, it was worse. It was the same or worse because the Xbox was completely new. It was like having a brand new startup that didn't
Ah,
know what it was doing,
yeah.
and it needed to be pre-programmed. It was like AI without a prompt. It had no clue what to do.
Ugh.
So we had to figure it out. And it was that simple. And okay, it was funded by Microsoft, but that was about it. The rest of it, we had to find a way to make it happen. And that played to my strengths. It's like Mr. Make It Happen is here,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that
So
challenge.
there was even times when I had to send a file to them. It's so basic now. if you remember FTP. I don't know. Do they still have
Yeah.
FTP now? I don't
Oh
know.
my gosh. Yeah.
I used to use Qt FTP, right? Because I didn't have to pay for it. So I'm
Yeah.
using Qt FTP to send files or receive files from
Yeah. Post them
Redmond,
somewhere where
Washington.
people can see them. Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the internet connection wasn't good enough, and every hour it kept disconnecting, and then it'd start over. The only way I could get some of these really essential art files from the US is if I stayed up all night, and if it says it was going to disconnect, just click it and say don't disconnect. So I would, there was times where I stayed in the office in the center of London, stayed up all night in a sleeping bag on my chair, just going every hour clicking don't disconnect,
Oh
just so I could
gosh.
get things to happen. But
Right.
that's me. I just
Yeah.
throw myself at it to make it happen. Otherwise, things don't happen. That's
Yeah.
how it was in the early days. When the first Xbox when its time was done, and time got called early on the first Xbox because it was losing so much money. The company was in such a crossroads. It's like, well, do we stick or twist? Do you know the analogy? Stick or twist?
No, but I think it
Oh,
means
if you
slap
play,
it off the pot.
yeah, if you play pontoon, if you play 21, it's like if you stick, you hold your cards. If you twist, it's like give me
Yeah.
another card.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of that. I don't know if you call it blackjack in the States, but
Like poker.
like
Hold
poker,
them or
it's stick
fold
or
them.
twist.
Yeah.
It's like hold or fold, right? So, and I'm like, the company was like, okay, twist, we're going to go again. There's going to be a new Xbox, and that was a huge pivot as well because the company showed great humility, and it got its behind handed to himself by the market, right? It wasn't successful. I mean, it sold 20 million units and lost $7 billion. So they started an install base and lost their shirt, right? At
Yeah.
the same time, because the cost to produce this thing was actually above what they were selling it for. And
Oh,
we go into the story
yeah.
about the economics of it in the book. But what they show great humility to go again, and great determination to take on the category. And of course, the competition was Sony and the PlayStation. So
Yeah.
it's non-trivial. I mean, it's massive competition, and Nintendo to some degree as well. So with the Xbox 360, we turned it around. And again, the full story is in the book. And we went from zero to hero in the space of 5 years.
Yeah.
So the first 4 years was a commercial disaster, but it established the brand at least. The second one, the Xbox 360, was both a huge success for the brand, but also a huge success commercially as well. And the key data point that I like to use is that by the time the Xbox 360 was kind of done, it was about 2012-ish. By the time all the votes were in from the market, certainly in the US, in Northern Europe, and the UK, it was the number one selling video games console in those markets. But moreover than that, it had a basket attach or a spend attach. So that's like all the money somebody would spend on Xbox, the games, the controllers, all the money they spend on it, they'd have a share of wallet of 46% in the category. Right. So to put that into context, Xbox 360 had 46% of all the money spent on video games in those countries.
That's crazy.
And that was bigger than Nintendo and Sony's PlayStation put together.
Yeah.
That's how big it was. So it was huge. So we went from losing $7 billion, and the budget was to lose 2 billion, by the way. So it was 3.5 times more than was expected. It's pretty painful, even for Microsoft, to be in the category we're in the next one. And all the stories about how that happened and all the fun we had,
right,
and all the challenges we had are in the story as well.
Well, and that I wanted to touch on something related to that, Harvey, and that is Michael Port, one of my favorite sales and marketing guys, says, only work with people who allow you to do your best work. And in the context of when he says that, he's referring to the client. Only pick the clients that. But to me, it also speaks to company culture. How much did the company culture feed into the latitude you had and the fueling of the creative energy of the marketing side and development side of Xbox?
I think outside of the talent of all the individuals and the budget that we had, I think that's a podium finish as well. Company culture is a not a sore point, but is a big point for me. To the point where, because of a lot of company cultures, I don't generally work for corporates anymore as an employee. I do consulting, but as an employee, those days for me are probably long over, and predominantly because of culture, right? And I think that the companies who get it right do really well. The better your culture, the better your company is going to be. And I think that certainly in those times when I was at Microsoft on the Xbox team for 12 years. For the majority of that, I would say that the culture was excellent, and it was a learn it all, do it all culture, not a know it all culture.
Oh, I love it.
And so, there was other parts of Microsoft that were a know it all culture. So the commercial divisions around Windows and Office, which were really the cash cow of the company. Not anymore, I hasten to add, but was the cash cow of the company, was a know it all culture. Xbox was more learn it all because we were new to the category.
Mhm.
And Microsoft culture has completely changed since Satya Nadella has been CEO, and he's moved the entire company culture from know it all to learn it all. And look what happened to the commercial results, right?
Yeah,
It's just whoosh, and the share price just
yeah.
took off, literally took off. So for me, I've worked in companies with great culture. I've worked in companies with toxic cultures as well, and it's an absolute retention killer for talent. Because if you've got a bad, let's put it like this: if you've got a bad manager, that employee will leave. If you've got a toxic culture, everybody will leave.
Yeah. That's the best way to put it. I love it. It's so true. Um, Everything you said really speaks volumes to how important company culture is. I do, Drum Talk TV, we were talking earlier, is 11 years old, turned 11 in January. And I've been told our company culture is good. I insist that everything's fun. There's hard work. There's always going to be challenges, and
Yeah,
we're innovating some new stuff for our membership site. But
yeah,
to me, it's got to be of fun. When people say if you enjoy what you do, you'll never work a day in your life, that is just BS. We work our asses off and we
yeah,
love what we do. We love our brand that we created and we work our butts off. So
yeah.
I don't buy that at all. I just
Well,
don't.
I mean, kudos to you, Dan, and to the team.
Thank
I
you.
think you could rephrase it, and it's like, if you love what you do, it doesn't feel like work, even
Yeah.
though it is
And you
work.
probably work harder because you put more
Yeah,
into it.
yeah,
You sink yourself deeper into it.
yeah, exactly. I'm totally with you, and congratulations to you as well for keeping the show on the road for 11 years, man. That,
Thanks.
that's like the birth of the internet. You've been there since day one, almost.
I remember getting on the internet, talking about Microsoft. Windows 95 put
I was there.
consumers on the internet. I think I
Yeah,
got on 96 in
yeah,
96.
yeah,
And it's interesting when I sometimes see old snapshots or frozen in time versions of websites from the
yeah.
90s,
Oh my
or
gosh.
goodness, some people now with websites that look like that.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
if you think of the technology of even forgetting functionality for a
yeah,
moment and the aesthetics of like people, I sound like the old man I am now. People under probably 40 have no idea
yeah,
what
yeah. That's
those
true.
the shapes and
Yeah,
the buttons used to look
yeah,
and all of that, the sound of a
yeah.
modem,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. I had, well, I was an early adopter, so I had dial up at home, dial up at the office. Um, we were on,
Oh, your story with the fax machines.
yeah, we were
Oh
on
my
DOS, we were on DOS and WordPerfect to begin with. Then we went to Windows 3.1 for work groups, and then I went on to Windows 95 in 95. I'll tell the fax machine story in a minute, but do you remember what your first internet search was? When you first saw the internet, you
I
saw a
do.
browser,
I
what
do.
did you search for?
It's a family show, so I can't say no, I'm
Make it
kidding.
legal, make it legal. Okay,
Yeah.
what was
The
legal that
very
you searched
first
for?
thing I remember vividly exactly what it looked like. I looked up Chris Squire of Yes. I wanted to see if he had a website. Huge Yes fan. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
doesn't even explain it, but
yeah,
and for some reason, and the second I remember the second was the Tabasco website and discovering all the flavors I didn't know
yeah.
about. Like that, those were my first two searches.
My first search, and I remember it very well because I was working at the record company I talk about in the book. I was working at the record company, and that's where I got introduced to Windows 95 because they
Mhm.
upgraded all their DOS,
From DOS, yeah,
IBM machines.
with the blinking cursor.
Yeah, we had all of that, dot matrix printers, everything was keystrokes, no mouse,
Yeah.
and I couldn't get on with it. But when we got Windows 95, I was like, okay, I can get on with this. And I remember the first thing that I searched, and this is not going to be a surprise to you, I searched for
AC/DC.
AC/DC. Yeah,
Yeah.
I searched for it. That's the first thing. And I remember this gray screen coming up and it had an AC/DC logo in the middle and some text. And I'm like, is this it?
That's hilarious.
This is it. This is the internet. I'm like, oh, maybe I'll come back later.
Yeah. What it really is interesting, the advance in technology and how
Yeah,
that has affected things like company culture and
yeah,
just
it has.
everything
It has.
related to
Yeah,
business and entertainment. So again, there's those applicable crossovers right
yeah.
there.
And there'll be so many people who read the book who won't even know what a fax machine is.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it was like,
Yeah.
"What's a fax machine?" And I remember, the first time I saw one was what, the early to mid '80s. It was this. I don't want to spoil the book for people, but it was this enormous. Basically, a fax machine is how you transfer a piece of paper to another destination. So it's like think of like sending an email, but you actually had a physical piece of paper that you put into a machine.
Or
It
or
would
or
send
being
out.
on the Starship Enterprise and beaming Spock and Bones down to another planet. It's like that
But you had to have a physical piece of paper.
to start
So
with.
you start with physical piece of paper going into the machine, and at the destination, a physical piece of paper would come out. And this thing was so. I remember seeing it in the place I was working at, and it was like the size of a wardrobe for this
Yeah.
to send an A4. Well, I don't know if you have A4. I think it's a legal pad piece of
Yeah.
paper,
Yeah.
size piece of paper in the US.
That's the equivalent. Yeah.
And I just couldn't understand. We were all standing around, wondering how this thing would work. We'd see a piece of paper disappear, and we couldn't understand conceptually in our mind, how is a piece of paper going down a phone line like this diameter? Like, was it cutting it up into the piece of paper into pieces and shoving it down, and at the
Yes.
other end it gets glued back together again? It's like we couldn't understand it. It's like it's this thing called data. And it's like in 1984, we were just like, what?
Yeah, ones and zeros. What?
Yeah. It was crazy. Anyhow, you have to read the full story in a book. It was a fantastic. I still remember
Yeah.
that event.
It's funny because there are people listening and watching that won't know what that is, and they think we need to be someone put these guys away somewhere.
No. Be curious and go onto the internet and search out fax machines and read about it.
Yeah.
It's
So I have
history.
two more questions for you.
Yeah,
One
go.
is, what's the biggest piece of advice that would be the most easiest to accomplish to people in the arts, any kind of arts, visual arts, music, any arts whatsoever, that they can apply regarding business? What should they absolutely, if there's one thing they do as artistic people on the business side, what should they pay attention to and know about?
Be curious.
Mm,
Be curious. Care about your business, right?
yeah,
So there's so many stories in the book about artists who didn't care about their business, or if they did, they got shafted.
yeah,
Care about your business, because you're not in the music business, you're in the business of music,
yeah.
right?
There's a difference.
This is the mental shift that you need to make. You're in the business of music, you're not in the music business. And nobody's going to look after your business better than you, right? And it's certainly not in the interest of a record label, a publisher. And there's perfectly good record labels and publishers out there. It's not a slight on them, but it's not their job to manage your business. It's their job to sell your product and pay you your due or whatever's in your contract. But
Mhm.
once you get what's due to you, what are you going to do with it? Right? That's the business. That's your business. So I've never ever worked for a company. Actually, Herman's Hermits were different, probably because out of their experiences of getting roughshod in their heyday,
Mhm.
they were pretty on the case when I met them in the '80s, right? But that's a harsh lesson, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they had lawsuits and stuff all flat, which they won, by the way. They won their lawsuit. But you don't want to have a 20-year lawsuit
Right.
to get your dues when, with the rate of inflation, by the time you get it, it's worth half of what it would have been,
Yeah.
right? It's not worth it. So be curious and know that you're in the business of music, and pay attention to the business. Even if you don't find, as most artists don't, creative people don't, that they have an aptitude for it, get over it,
That's
right?
awesome. Thanks.
It's your money. It's
Yeah.
your money, right?
Absolutely. One last question. Thanks for that wisdom. In about a minute that we have left, what do you like to do when you're completely those slivers of time not
Yeah,
working?
they are slithers. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. What do you like to do when you're not working, Harvey?
I like to watch football.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
American or European?
there's only one kind, Dan. Come on.
Okay.
Yeah, do I have to say the word soccer? Yeah.
For those who don't
Yeah,
know,
yeah, yeah. I tell you what, for an English person, it's hard to say the word soccer because
I
it
bet.
like it feels like a foreign object to us. But
Yeah,
it's soccer, yeah. So, good old fashioned
cool.
British football, and my team is Manchester City, who are
Nice.
the current champions of England
Yeah,
and European champions and World Club champions as well. So they've won 5
awesome.
trophies in the past season. It wasn't always that way. They were languishing in three divisions below when I was following them as a child.
Right.
But the
That's
past 10
great.
years has been like a fairy tale. So I love football, English football. My kids love football, playing, watching, talking. So it's kind of a way of life.
Great.
And when I was a single man, which was more years ago than I care to remember, um, my spare time was watching. If it was a live game on, it didn't matter who it was, I'd watch it.
Even
Right?
that's in the book. Folks, you gotta get the book. Harvey, thanks so much. Hang on the line, after we wave goodbye. I wanna talk about opening a banana bar together. But
All
folks,
right.
you gotta get the book. The link is in the post. It's a great read, whether you're in business, whether you're in the music business, whether you're just a music fan, musician, just get the book. Thanks, everybody, and we will see you soon with more fun stuff on Drum Talk TV. Thanks, Harvey. Hang out with me for a minute.
All right.